All right, welcome back to the program. We have heard the terminology constitutional convention from time to time. It is a process that has never actually played out in our country, but it is the second process in the Constitution to facilitate amending the Constitution. And people have talked about that for a variety of reasons. The two biggest are probably a amendment that would call for a balanced budget of the federal government, and the other is to put term limits on members of Congress, both of which, surprisingly, members of Congress don't seem to want to take up on their own. Therefore, outside forces, mainly you and I and our states, are moving towards the goal of having 3/4 of the states sign on to basically a resolution that says we want to call a constitutional convention. Joining us on the Minuteman Press guest line this morning to help us sort some of that out is Kenn Quinn with the organization U.S. Term Limits. Ken, good morning.
Good morning, Tim. How are you?
I'm doing well, and I appreciate you joining us this morning. This for us would fall into this category of, I didn't know that. Both the state assembly and the state senate in various committees at this point have passed resolutions, which are sisters to each other, that would put Wisconsin in a place to be the next state that would also have a resolution to call the Constitutional Convention if this is then now passed by both chambers, the Assembly and the House here in Wisconsin. We need 34 state legislatures to call the convention. Do you have any idea how likely this is to pass in Wisconsin at the next levels?
Well, yeah, so yesterday we had a great victory in the Assembly Committee, the resolution, which is AJR 16, sponsored by Representative Timothy Ransom, passed the committee by a 5-3 vote. And then a few weeks ago, SJR 12, which is sponsored by Senator Dewey Strobel, passed that committee by a vote of 3-2. So we're making really good advancement here in Wisconsin. And so the next phase of this is to get a floor vote in the House and the Senate to get Wisconsin to join with other states to call for an Article 5 convention. And I would like, when you have a minute, I'd like to explain the difference between an Article 5 convention and a constitutional convention, because there's some misunderstanding about this process.
Well, yeah, we want to get into that. The work has been going on for a number of years, kind of behind the scenes. Rarely does it make national news or whatever, but states have been slowly but surely signing on to this idea. Fortunately, I guess to at least some regard, states are listening to their voters. I know that you refer to a poll done by McLaughlin and Associates that says 74% of likely voters in Wisconsin support term limits. And that goes across party lines with 82% of Republicans and 69% of Democrats. That surprises me because I would have thought it would have been the other way around. But doesn't matter. So we're here, and of course, it's not likely that any Congress people or senators are going to impose term limits on themselves. So this is where we're at, and this is where other states believe we're at. So first off, where do we sit nationally, as best you know, with the numbers of states that appear to be poised to be ready to jump on this thing?
Okay, well, so our resolution is a single subject resolution, and so it's only for congressional term limits. Now, there's other efforts out there calling for different amendments, so they're separate. So we need 2/3 of the states to pass the same application on the same subject matter. Mm-hmm. And so as of right now, with our single subject, 4 states have passed ours so far. Now, there's other applications out there that are multiple subject applications that do contain the same subject as congressional term limits. So what we need to do is continue to get more. So we have a number of actions in the states around the country as of right now. We're looking to hopefully pass this in a few others, but we are active, I think, in over 20 states in this session alone. So this is getting tremendous support from the grassroots, the people. We've seen a real influx this year on folks wanting to get this done to help us. And so it's pretty exciting.
All right, well, let's talk about the procedures here a little bit, as you made reference to. An Article 5 convention and a constitutional convention. Most of people out there probably would think they're the same thing. And one of the pushbacks against the states doing this is people, at least a percentage of them, believe that if such a convention were held by the states, that would basically allow the people in attendance to rewrite the entirety of the Constitution if they so chose.
Yeah, unfortunately, that is a lot of the misinformation that is being pushed out by the opponents of good reforms. And I'll admit, I used to believe that. I was one of the people that believed this was a constitutional convention and can do exactly that. And I was actually fighting against such a resolution. But all it took for me was just to do a little bit of my own research, and I realized, wow, this is a tool that the framers gave us specifically as a check against a unresponsive federal government and Congress. And so I'd like to just go quickly back to how it developed. So the amending is just to kind of bring people up to speed what we're talking about. The amending provision of our Constitution is Article 5. It's one very long sentence. It only allows two methods of proposing amendments. Either 2/3 of both houses of Congress would need to pass an amendment and then send it out to the states for ratification, and then it requires 3/4 of the states to ratify. So today that would be 38 states to ratify an amendment. And that's how we've had all of our 27 amendments. Actually, we've had 33 amendments proposed and 27 have been ratified. The second option that's never been done before, but has come very close a few times in our history, is what's called an Article 5 convention. And that process is very similar. It requires 2/3 of the state legislatures to concur. They must agree on the same subject or the same amendment by passing such resolution as we have in Wisconsin. And once 2/3 of the legislature, so today that would be 34, pass the same application, Congress has two roles in this process. Number one, they call the convention, which is simply date, time, and place. That's all the call is. They don't get to pick the delegates that go from the states. They don't make the rules. They just say, okay, you guys can meet here. And then the second role that Congress has is if an amendment does pass out of the convention, it's one state, one vote, just like all of the conventions we've had in our history have operated. So let's say all 50 states send delegates. It would take 26 states to pass the amendment, and then you'd still need 38 states to ratify. So Congress does get to determine the mode of ratification, whether it's done by state legislatures or state ratifying conventions. Now, both of those have been used in the past. The 21st Amendment was ratified by the people in conventions. And so this is nothing new. It's been a while since we've utilized the processes, but it's something that we definitely have got to get accomplished.
Well, I think it's probably more a matter of most of us don't even know that it exists because it's never been used. It's not talked about in the news. When states move to pass things, I was caught off guard with your press release to know that this was already moving through the State House here in Wisconsin. And a lot of people have been frustrated with the federal government for a long time. I can't remember how long I've been sitting in this chair where we've looked at the approval rating of Congress, and it's been, 10% or lower, but it's been a good 6-8 years. People are frustrated, and I think they've thrown their hands up in the air and say they'll never change this. So what can we do?
I know, and that's the real hope of Article 5, because I'm the same way. It's like you get so tired of voting and nothing changes, and that's the power of this. And that is why we need our state legislators to realize the authority that they have under the Constitution. When it boils down, they are responsible for what's happening at the federal level because they have the duty and the authority to change and make or introduce needed reforms. And one of them is obviously term limits. We know Congress is not going to muster the 2/3 needed to put term limits on themselves. And so the only way this will get done is by the state legislatures doing this on behalf of the American people. And it's time that they take action. As you said, the incumbent party is in control. The ones that are down there for decades are the ones controlling everything, and nothing's going to change until we change this very structure, because unfortunately we can keep sending people to Congress, but you can't vote out human nature at the ballot box. And that's what this structural change will accomplish for us.
We've talked about this several times on the program, and trying to be someone who understands both sides of an issue. Ken, I've looked at this and said, okay, I understand the mess we're in and how we can't move anywhere when all these same people push the same things for 25 years in a row. On the other hand, there are a few people in Congress who folks might say, you know what? They really are representative of their constituents, and they're fair and they're reasonable, and they offer good governance, and we might want to keep them, and this would basically not enable us to do that. What kind of a structure is U.S. term limits advocating for as far as the length of term limits, the number of terms, those kinds of things, and is there any provision where somebody could either continue in their office or take a break and run again?
Well, that's a good question. So out of the two methods that we're advocating, so we do have an amendment in Congress. So we're trying to do this as well in Congress. And that is a very specific amendment that seeks to have an amendment for 2 terms on U.S. senators. So a term is 6 years. That would be a total of 12 years somebody could serve in the Senate, and 3 terms in the House for a total of 6 years. So technically, one person would be able to serve in Congress for 18 years. Now, the initiative that we're looking at here in Wisconsin, for the application, we did not get that defined. We left the number of terms open. We just want to have this meeting held on the states to meet on behalf of the American people and let them hammer that out at the convention to propose the amendment. So now, I hear that a lot. We have the good people. Well, there's a lot of good people in the country, and I think when I hear people say, well, we can't lose so-and-so, there's nobody that good that we can't do without. And there's millions of people, thousands of people that are well qualified to represent us in Congress. And unfortunately, a lot of those good quality people don't even bother to run because the amount of money that's required to be an incumbent. And so we're really losing out on good representation because we just don't have people running because it's virtually impossible to defeat an incumbent.
Well noted. And that was going to be my next question, Ken. It's all right. The implications of this seem a little more far-reaching than just throwing that bum out after 6 years or whatever, so to speak. You're going to cause shakeups, and it would cause people, I suppose, nearing the end of a term, if they, for instance, a congressperson, if they didn't want to go on to the Senate in that last 2 years, they'd begin to find other employment, line something up, those kinds of things. And so there would be a constant turnover that would allow, it seems to me, a better variety of candidates to show up on the ballot because there would be no incumbents, as you say, in Congress every 6 years in the House of Representatives. What would that look like, in your opinion, as it relates to the amount of money thrown at these races? I'm trying to think, for instance, in Wisconsin, in the 1st Congressional District, it tends to be Republican. Democrats have made some progress in that district over time, but the Republican always gets the seat partly because of gerrymandering and partly because of money. And if, in this case, it happens to be Representative Style, it doesn't matter who, but, he would be done in another 2 years. there wouldn't be an incumbent. It would be an open seat. There's a chance that seat could flip.
Yeah, and that's what's so great about term limits, because term limits is a form of, I hear often, well, we need campaign finance to get big money out of politics. And this is a way of doing that, because 97% of corporate PAC money goes to the incumbents. And I think we all know why that's the case. And what having competitive, fair, and open seat elections will do for us is that money, the lobbyists, the PACs, all that special interest money is not going to be going to challengers, because they want to give the money on a safe bet, the ones that they've been cozy with for decades in Washington. And once we shake, that's what we need. We need to shake up the system. This will send shockwaves to both of the parties. I think this will be a great opportunity for people maybe outside of the two major parties to actually have an opportunity to represent us at the federal level as well. So what term limits will do, it will give us, the voters, more options at the ballot box. I'm so tired of getting the same choice election after election, and I'm sure most people are as well. So we'll have more options. We'll actually see more people from a variety of different backgrounds participating in our government in Washington, which I think is desperately needed. If we're going to get any real reforms, I want people with real life experience, not institutional knowledge there for decades. We got to change things, because the way it's going, we can't sustain this much longer. And so the only way to bring real reform to help get big money out of a lot of the politics and elections is term limits for Congress.
This would, it seems to me, Ken, even open the process further from the standpoint of being able to consider more than one candidate. Whenever a congressional seat would open up in your congressional model after 6 years, there would likely be a primary where there would be several interested candidates of each party that would run, and you would be exposed to perhaps half a dozen or more potential candidates that you would find nuances in and differences of opinion and policy in. And it would just seem to me that, yes, it would make the process more healthy from the standpoint of making sure that the people in that district are putting the best of multiple choices in, as opposed to always checking Paul Ryan or always checking Mark Pocan or around here.
Yeah, you're exactly right. So we'd see more people running in the primary races, and that's going to elevate the quality of these candidates, as well as third-party candidates will have more of a real shot of winning some of these open seats. So we could see independents winning some of these seats as well. And so I think this is a reform that we desperately need. We have term limits on the president. We have term limits at the state level on governors. Heck, we even have term limits on military generals. So I think it's time we put term limits on members of Congress, because day after day, we're just seeing the dysfunction. It's a broken system. It's all about party power and self-interest. And I think the American people are at the tipping point where enough is enough, and they want to make some change.
Absolutely. Well, again, at the very least, to know that there is an option and to give it some consideration for listeners across the country. I hope you're able to kind of at least stir this pot that much as you go forward in all the states. What would be the implication, Ken, as long as I have you, and we're talking about these unconventional, if you will, the potential gatherings of states, is it possible once one of these conventions, Article 5 conventions, let's just say you get yours across the finish line.
Yeah.
Would the states then be allowed to also introduce other items? So could campaign finance reform come up? Could a balanced budget amendment come up? Or would they be restricted, in the case of your efforts, to just this one topic?
Yeah, it's very restricted. And so this is how the process works. I meant to mention earlier, this is not a constitutional convention that the opponents will call con. In fact, Immediately after the framers at the Philadelphia Convention unanimously approved the language of Article 5, a motion was made to give it the authority of a con, and they rejected that. So the requirements to call a true constitutional convention, which is to adopt a new constitution, is much higher. It's basically unanimous consent to call it, to pass it, and then to ratify it. So this is just to propose a single amendment. And so how the process works is there's been over 400 of these Article 5 applications passed and sent to Congress. It began in 1788. The reason we have the Bill of Rights was because Virginia immediately sent an Article 5 application to Congress for the Bill of Rights because that's what the Federalists were promising, and they weren't waiting for Congress to do the right thing. They took matters into their own hands, and that helped to prod Congress and James Madison specifically to introduce the Bill of Rights. So out of the 400 applications, a few times it's come very close to triggering a convention, but it's limited to the subject of those applications. And so how the process works is once 34 states agree on the subject, then each state legislature will send what they will commission commissioners. So they're actually commissioners that are sent. Contained within that commission specifies, because they are legally bound, they are the agents of their principal being the state legislature. So they represent the state legislature, and contained in that commission will be the authority granted by the state legislature. And so Congress will call the convention, which is the date, time, and place, and the subject matter. The states will then issue their commission stating what they are allowed to discuss and debate on. And then at the convention itself, it will take a majority of the states to pass the amendments. And then it still requires, remember, this convention has no power. It has no authority other than to propose a simple, solution, an amendment. It still requires 38 states to ratify it before it becomes part of the Constitution. So this is it's a very heavy lift. And there's safeguards all throughout the process. And even, let's say something like off topic was introduced and was even passed, which in the real political world is just unforeseeable. I don't see how that could even be possible. Congress would just simply refuse to send it out for ratification because it was not part of the scope of their call. So, and not to mention all the legal challenges it would face. And so that's why this process is nothing to fear. And unfortunately, I hear your legislators, even in the committees, I'm fearful. There's so much fear about this, unfortunately, because the opponents, the groups out there that are trying to protect the establishments, to maintain the status quo, have created a lot of fear around this when we have a long, rich history of conventions among the states, not to propose amendments, but to propose other solutions. And it's something that we shouldn't be fearful of. We need to embrace and use as the framers intended it to be used. It's time, because we're running out of time.
Well, I appreciate your take on definitions here, because I had pulled up a piece from from coloradofisco.org that was discussing this, and they have the various campaigns that are out there and the progress they're making and all that kind of thing. So, for instance, on the balanced budget amendment, there are 28 states with Article 5 convention applications, and as you stated, we need 34, so there need to be 6 more in that regard. But every time they refer to that in this article, they refer to it as if they got that 34 state consensus, that it would be a constitutional convention called, and that must be where the definition is getting off, because then people are going into the Constitution and seeing that a true constitutional convention opens up the entire Constitution, but that's not what any of these applications would do.
Exactly. And so if it was an open convention, that means there's been over 400 of these applications passed. Well, why hasn't a convention been called? Well, it's simple. It's just common sense, because there's never been 2/3 that have concurred on the same subject. And so that just alone proves it's limited. So you're right. They're 6 states away. I believe Wisconsin did pass the BBA one, the balanced budget, a few years ago. And so each of these efforts out there needs to get 2/3 of the states to pass their subject in order for the convention to be called. And then it's limited to that subject. And unfortunately, the groups out there that want to create this fear, they often will, on purpose, try to confuse people to believe this is a true constitutional convention, which can rewrite the Constitution. Simply not true.
Well, I think this is important information for people to have, if only to say, look, the framers of the Constitution, and I know the Constitution's been getting beat up a lot these days. I still consider it one of the most brilliant documents out there, and again, in understanding Article 5 a little bit deeper, it does seem like exactly that. Like somehow, way back in 1776, these folks all went, no, people are kind of goofy. They'll just hang on to power as long as they can, or they'll do something stupid, and we got to have a way to put the power back in the actual people's hands when that happens. And that's appears to be what we need to do now, is understand that we do still, as citizens and voters, have some power here.
Yeah, and for state legislators, if you truly believe in federalism, this is the ultimate tool the framers gave to the state legislatures as a way to protect our securities and our liberties from an overreaching federal government. And that is what federalism is all about. And, I would just like to direct, if I could, people to our website, to, if they're interested to learn more about this. You could go to termlimits.com, and I'm going to ask you to do 3 things. Number 1, sign our petition. That's how you will receive updates on what's happening in Wisconsin. We really need people sending messages to their state legislators to support this, make calls. Also, we have a current call to action under the Take Action section, or the current action for Wisconsin. You can just quickly send a message right there. And then if you go up top, there's what's called the Facts tab, and there's a section called Debunking Myths Against an Article 5 Convention and Term Limits. There is a rich resource of a lot of the information we've been talking about, Tim, and I have links directly to the original sources. So you can actually read the writings of the framers themselves on this subject matter, and how they were they all understood and agreed that it's limited, it's for a single amendment, and there's a lot of great rich history that we have with conventions throughout our, heck, even before our founding. It's fabulous history. It really is.
Well, it's good to know these things that are going on, and especially here, since we are now at the point where both of these in Wisconsin both houses have passed them out of committee. The next step is to see if the leaders of the chambers will bring them to the floor for a vote. And based on what I think I know around here, I'm pretty sure Governor Evers would sign that. But that would remain to be seen. But again, at this point, certainly contact your legislators and tell them you want to see this voted on, if indeed you do.
Thanks, Tim. Yeah, I appreciate that. Actually, the governors do not, they have no, they're not involved in the process. So it's not like
really?
a typical bill. Yeah, so governors don't, they're not allowed to sign. It just has to pass the legislature, which makes that even a little bit easier for the process. And so,
and doesn't let one of the more powerful politicians nuke the whole idea. So I guess that's good as well. Well, this has been fascinating, Ken. We appreciate you joining the program today to talk about this again. The website again is
termlimits.com.
Simple enough. All right. We'll keep watching the progress here. Thanks, Ken.
Thank you, Tim. Have a good day now.
You
Bye-bye.
as well.